Hi, welcome back to The Witchy Web We Weave. I'm Alara.
Alex.
And today we're continuing our Tarot Tuesday series. And this episode is going to be spent talking about the Magician, which at this point we're going to have a little photo.
Somewhere here.
Yeah, somewhere in here that you can look at while I'm kind of going through this. I'm going to continue this in the same vein that I did with the Fool, where I'm just going to talk about some of the major symbolism within the card. And then talk about some of the pros and cons of the card itself and maybe give you some examples. And just talk to you about the energy of the card in general. I actually really enjoy the Magician. It is one of those cards that I think I didn't really appreciate it very much from the beginning. It was one of the cards that I overlooked in favor of some of the other cards that I like the imagery more of. But the more that I actually looked at the card and I kept having the Magician coming up in some of my readings, he became much more common as I was learning the tarot, and the more that I saw him, the more that I actually began to appreciate him and his energy. So when we're looking at the Magician card, one of the I kind of have little catchphrases or keywords that I kind of have for each of the cards that just kind of helped me as I was learning. The way that I look at the Magician is I think of him as the cosmic spark.
Okay.
Or I think of him like the snapping of fingers. That energy that comes with snapping your fingers is kind of how I associate with the Magician. When we're looking at the card itself and looking at the symbolism of the Magician, one of the things that you notice is that his clothing, what he's wearing. He actually, when you look at his clothing, oftentimes the Magician is wearing a white robe, which most people know is a symbol of purity, But on top of the white robe, he's wearing a red cloak, which, red, the color of passion. So we have within this figure a lot of that swirling. There is a purity of intent, but it's also driven and continued with that red, that passion, that energy, that force of will. And that's very much how I view the Magician. He is very much a force of will.
Okay.
In kind of cosmic terms. He is he's represented by one. He is the creation. He is where there was nothing, there is suddenly something. And that is also shown a lot in other imagery within the cards. Because when you look at the card itself, there's a table normally in front of him. And on the table are 4 different items, all associated with each of the other suits. He has all of these elements at his beck and call. They are tools in his tool belt. And normally, within his symbolism, he's holding a wand in his hands, high up. But he's not holding it the same way that the Fool had, where the Fool very much, had it very loosely.
Kind of dainty.
Kind of daintily held. Mm-hmm. But with the Magician, when you look at the symbolism, often he is shown firmly gripped in his hand. He has now realized that the wand is power, that the wand is strength. And he's beginning to understand how to use it. He's actually getting a firm grip on his own abilities. Also, an interesting thing that I like to point out to people when they're first learning about the Magician and they're looking at the symbology of the Magician is the position of his hands. Not just with him holding the wand, but whenever you look at the character, he's most times shown with one arm upraised with the wand and the other one pointing down, which is very well known in the phrase, as above, so below.
Oh, okay.
So, and that's very much what he is all about. He's all about
that balance.
Of as above, so below. He is a bridge between the divine and the physical,
So kind of between magic and mundane almost.
Exactly.
Gotcha.
He's also the bridge between fantasy and reality, or the ether and the material.
Okay.
He is actually the channel. He is the open circuit through which that energy flows, where he is making something immaterial and making it physical. And that's very much what his energy is all about. He is the spark of creation. He is the creator. And oftentimes, I like to think of him also as the tinkerer. He's someone that Kind
of like alchemist.
Yes, and actually that's something that I'm going to bring up a little bit later when I start talking about examples. because I know.
Sorry.
Spoiler alert.
We just said mixing elements, and that's the first thing I thought of.
But yeah, he is very much a tinkerer in the way that he does things. But everything that he does with intelligence. He does it with intention, which is why oftentimes when you look at the traditional Rider-Waite symbolism of the magician, he is commonly shown with a yellow background. He is very much a creature, a character of intellect. He is what I consider to be a very much embodiment of the air element, because everything that he does it with purpose. He does it with intention. And everything that he does is for the purpose of him learning more about himself and growing. That's why oftentimes when you see his symbolism, he has a bunch of living plants or flowers growing at the base, growing upwards into the rest of the image. There is growth there. Some of it is physical, but a lot of it is also spiritual. He also he's often depicted with, I'm going to start with the one that's a little bit more noticeable. He's often depicted with the infinity sign above his head, which is a symbol that will be repeated in other future cards that I'm going to talk about, most notably in cards like Strength. But he also has a belt, which most people don't notice, a belt made of the Ouroboros snake.
Oh, okay.
So he's very much cyclical. He's all about that continued flow, that never-ending flow. He's all a part of the cycle. The never-ending cycle. So when we're talking about the pros and cons of the magician, a lot of times when you're talking about the pros, you're talking about pure creation, you're talking about force of will, you're talking about improving your skill, or often I've seen him depicted as a literal representation of something that is manifesting or something that is coming into being. But for me personally, oftentimes when I see the magician, he is there to talk about the literal spark of creativity, or the spark of intention for something, like beginning a new project or starting to create something that is very personal to you, or creating something that is literally in some ways a part of you or a living embodiment of what you are. So oftentimes he comes up in a lot of my things talking about my spiritual questions and questions that I read for myself in regards to my own creativity or my own personal projects. And in a lot of ways, I get him a lot as the literal representation of someone.
Okay.
Or as myself. So that's interesting in the fact that sometimes the magician is not just talking about a situation or talking about a subject, but he can also be the representation of you in a endeavor that you are doing. Like you are taking or being shown as the magician. Which probably explains why a lot of times I also have seen the magician represented as an artist or literally as a visionary. He's very much about taking what is up here and turning it into something physical. When you look at the opposite or the flip side of the magician, a lot of times when the magician comes up reversed, or if you're not reading reversals, if something is indicating a negative side of the magician, often this is something that is trying to convey a great loss. But normally it's a great loss of your sense of self, or a great loss of your passion or your creative spark. Or losing touch with that side of yourself. But the downside of the magician can also be a misuse or an abuse of your own power or your own way of doing things. Like doing something that is a discredit to yourself, even though you may understand that you're doing it, but you do it anyway. I've also seen him associated with literally when you lose your will to do something, or you lose your will for life, or lose that zest for life. Which is why I think one of the I am talking about the negativities of the card. And this part is a little bit harder for me to talk about sometimes, but it is very much in tune with the magician because he is all about that connection to the divine, but also to the material. So I also see the magician connected a lot with your sense of spirituality or your sense of your place in the world. So a lot of times, well, not a lot of times, this happens very rarely, but sometimes it can happen where if you get the reverse of the magician, or if you get the negatives of the magician, it is literally talking about that disconnect between yourself and the spiritual, or your disconnect in your will to live, or your spark of life. So sometimes this card can mean suicide, or suicidal ideations, or severe and utter depression. Although that's very rare. That's very rare. So don't automatically jump to that if you get the reverse of the magician. He can mean a bunch of different things. I'm talking about the worst case scenario of the reverse of the magician. But often I also see the reverse of the magician associated with the idea of imposter syndrome. Like, you may be fully capable and able to do something, but you always feel like you don't belong, or that you are an imposter in something, even if you are capable. So sometimes the reverse of the magician can be something like that as well. When we're talking about, moving on, as I mentioned before in the Fool, when I was looking at the symbology of the Fool, at the very end, I was talking about the way that I sometimes help to associate cards as I'm learning them with concepts is I try to think of examples within movies, books, real life. Sometimes it helps if you take each of the cards and you associate them with something that has that same energy to it. So for the purposes of the magician today, I'm going to give you a couple of my favorite examples of the magician energy. As I was talking before, I really associate this motion with the energy of the magician, the ability to, it's almost like out of thin air, you just have nothing but your fingers, your own hands, your own tools. And all of a sudden you're creating something. You're creating sound. You're creating energy, vibration. You are making something of what most people would think of as nothing. So one of my favorite, I'm going to show my nerdiness. If y'all have ever watched the show or read the manga Full Metal Alchemist. Colonel Mustang in particular, because he is the one that actually has this motion where he has
the glove.
Yeah, he has the glove. So this is literally his tool. He uses his own hands, and he only has inscriptions. But with that, he is alchemizing and taking the elements of the air and the elements of the energy of his fingers, and he creates fire. That's very much what I see of it in the magician. He's using his mind. He's being intelligent about it, but he's also using the tools in his own body to create something from almost what people consider to be nothing.
Mm-hmm.
But I think a lot of the characters in Full Metal Alchemist, that idea of alchemizing and equivalent exchange happens a lot with the energy of the magician. Another really popular character that I think more people will know about,
probably,
just because it happened much more recently, it's kind of a big thing right now with the Marvel movies, is Thanos. The gauntlet, snapping, the creation or destruction of something. Because when you're looking at the magician, he is not only a force of creation, he can also be a force of destruction or breaking down something.
Which is kind of weird because Thanos' whole thing was about balance.
Balance, yeah.
So, yeah.
And that's the thing. I do very much see, more so than maybe other people sometimes, but I do see the magician as a figure of balance. That's one of the reasons why with the infinity symbol, there's the up and there's the down. There's that constant flow. It's not just up, 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 up one way. There is actually that up and down motion to it. He is a figure of balance. There is creation, but there is also destruction. That's also the up and the down. Thanos, the gauntlet. He actually has stones. He is taking elements from different parts, putting them all together. He's using his own body, and he's making that creation or that destruction through his force of will, through his force of determination. He tries to be intelligent about it. He tries to be logical. All of these different things, I think, ties in very well the idea and the symbology, the utter essence of what the magician can be. So that's mostly it. I think the last thing to keep in mind is when you're looking at the magician, in my own mind, I consider him a source of limitless potential. He has limitless power and energy. The only thing that restricts him is himself. Because he is the vessel for all of this energy, for all of this creation. He contains it within himself. He is the vessel. So really, in his own power, he has no real limits, but only the limits that he puts on himself. Something to think about and to consider while you look at your own cards and look at your own representation of the magician and what you see. So I hope that this was beneficial. I hope that you learned something or were able to take something away that may help you get a deeper understanding or a deeper connection with the magician, because I think he is truly a magical and important card within the tarot, even though I do think he is sometimes overlooked for other cards. But I hope you enjoyed, and I hope that you'll see me again for my next Tarot Tuesday video in 2 weeks. Alright,
Toodaloo.
bye!